A samurai in full armor could have literally sent a fax to Abraham Lincoln. No, seriously. Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to completely shatter your perception of time with a historical reality that sounds entirely fake, but is 100% true. Prepare yourselves because everything you thought you knew about the timeline of human history is about to get turned completely upside down. We always tend to think of history happening in these neat, separate little chapters, right? Well, today, we're looking at what happens when those chapters violently crash into each other. Yes, there was an actual, literal moment in history where a sword-wielding samurai could have sent a facsimile transmission straight to Abraham Lincoln. I know. Your brain is probably rejecting this premise right now. It sounds like the plot of a ridiculous, high-budget sci-fi movie. But it is an absolute, undeniable historical certainty. This isn't a joke, it isn't an exaggeration, it is a factual overlap of human events that proves global history is way, way wilder than fiction. So let's look at Section 1, Three Icons in 1860. Let's zoom in on the year 1860, because three iconic forces were simultaneously active on Earth at that exact moment. First up, you have the samurai. Now, these weren't ancient relics. This elite warrior class was still actively patrolling the streets of Edo, which is what we now call Tokyo. They were wearing traditional armor, carrying razor-sharp katanas, and strictly following the ancient Bushido code. Okay, second, right across the ocean, you have Abraham Lincoln wearing his iconic top hat, actively campaigning for the presidency of the United States while the country teetered on the absolute brink of the Civil War. And third, the fax machine. Yes, the electric printing telegraph, which is the direct mechanical ancestor to the modern fax machine, clanking away with its swinging pendulums and chemical paper, had actually already been invented and patented by a Scottish inventor named Alexander Bain all the way back in 1843. What this means is that this exact alignment created a staggering 22-year window in human history. Think about that number. For more than 2 decades, a warrior in feudal Japan could have hypothetically walked over to an early electric printing terminal and transmitted a document straight across the globe, right into the hands of Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C. This wasn't just a passing second or some fleeting anomaly. An entire generation lived during a period where medieval warriors and telecommunications literally overlapped. Which brings us to Section 2, Why This Feels Wrong. So, why does this feel so deeply impossible to our brains? Why does it feel so wrong to pit the idea of ancient knights against modern telecommunications? Well, it's mostly because of how we're taught history. We learn about eras. We put medieval times in one box, the Renaissance in another box, and the Industrial Revolution in a totally separate box. We just assume that because samurai represent a medieval, feudal way of life, they absolutely must have vanished centuries before someone figured out how to send an image over an electrical wire. But the reality of global history is way messier, and honestly far more fascinating than a straight, uniform line. Let's jump to Section 3, Japan's frozen timeline. To understand how this happened, we have to talk about sakoku. This was a strict Japanese isolationist policy enforced by the ruling shogunate. And when I say strict, I mean unimaginably strict. No foreigner could enter the country and no Japanese citizen could leave under absolute penalty of death. It was a complete and total lockdown of an entire nation from the rest of the globe. And this wasn't just a short-term political stunt. For 250 years under this policy, Japan was intentionally frozen in time. While the rest of the world was violently exploring, trading, and sharing new ideas, Japan essentially operated as a perfectly preserved cultural terrarium. It effectively halted technological and social evolution, beautifully preserving the medieval feudal era of the samurai, while centuries literally just ticked by outside their borders. The contrast across the globe is honestly astonishing. On one side, in Europe and America, you have the booming Industrial Revolution. The loud, smoggy hiss of steam engines fills the air as they connect vast distances, and telegraph wires are crackling with electricity, enabling instant communication. It's the chaotic birth of the modern world. Meanwhile, on the exact same day, you look at Japan and you find a society experiencing the quiet, cherry blossom-lined streets of feudal Edo. It's literally as if a portal opened up, connecting the 15th century directly to the 19th century. Now for Section 4, the Washington, D.C. twist. In the very same year we've been focusing on, 1860, the heavy doors of sakoku finally creaked open. Japan sent its very first diplomatic embassy directly to the United States. They crossed the immense Pacific Ocean, sailing away from their perfectly preserved medieval society, and made a monumental, earth-shattering voyage straight into the epicenter of the American Industrial Revolution, Washington, D.C.
I want you to really visualize this quote. Three traditional samurai diplomats walked the streets of New York and Washington in full silk robes and katanas, completely mesmerized by American steam trains and telegraph wires. Just picture that in your head. Men who had dedicated their entire lives to the mastery of the sword, men who represented a feudal system that felt centuries old, standing right there on the bustling, dirty, modern streets of America, staring up at telegraph wires that were zipping messages across the country at the speed of light. It's an absolute collision of worlds.
But tragically, this unbelievable cultural intersection was an incredibly narrow window. The embassy arrives and creates this completely surreal overlap in 1860, but history moves incredibly fast. Just 5 years later, in 1865, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. And just 3 years after that, in 1868, Japan officially goes through a massive modernization period known as the Meiji Restoration and abolishes the samurai class entirely. Which means these two vast worlds, the ancient era of the sword and the modern era of the wire, missed fully integrating by a matter of mere months. It really shatters everything we think we know about history, doesn't it? Our past isn't a straight, boring line. It's a messy, overlapping web of unbelievable realities. Which leaves us with one final, awe-inspiring question to take away today. How many other impossible timeline overlaps are we currently blind to? Think about it. If a samurai could have faxed Abraham Lincoln, what other historical collisions are hiding directly under our noses? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this completely changed how you look at the timeline of humanity, and I can't wait to dive into the next fascinating topic with you soon. Keep learning and keep questioning what you think you know.